see a hand there, which is a gentleman in the hand there, please, a mic. And if I take another person with a hand up so they can get a mic to be ready. Right, okay, we're off. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Rogerson. I'm currently a trustee of Samaritans, but over the last 45 years I've been a trustee of 15 other charities. So what I want to turn to is the sector as a whole, because most of the social investments tend to be property related at the moment. I'd like to look at how we can change that. We know in the sector there are far too many charities, particularly in particular areas. The potential for taking a merger fund and investing, say, 10 charities and give you a £10 million fund, which will be repaid over the next 10 years out of the savings you make by carrying out that merger, would be a fantastic boon to the charity sector, would take out an enormous amount of infrastructure costs, and would make a real benefit to the beneficiaries of those charities. Have you done any work on that? And if you haven't, do you think that is a possible route for a future investment trust?
Thank you for that question. Now, I'll just pipe up before I pass it to the rest of the panel. Curiously, I was at a meeting last week with PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, and that very topic cropped up amongst a group of us, all of whom were in the charity sector. So I think you're right, sir, that there is an awareness building. Whether there are solutions and how quickly they will emerge, we shall wait to see. But any thoughts from the panel on that very subject of how can we enable charities to emerge together to just become this? To the question.
I think it's brilliant. I think it's a brilliant idea. There are far too many that need to merge. Though whether anyone wants to take on the political consequences of the infighting and pitching that would go with that, and that seems to be the greatest problem. And also the massive yes, definitely think it ought to happen. Though I have heard a lot of people talking about the same thing, trying to encourage people to merge. And I always congratulate people who sort of fall on their sword and step aside to allow two charities to come together, say the Fairbridge and the Prince's Trust, where they came together. Don't hate me.
It's extraordinarily difficult to do it in the commercial world, as you will know, I suspect. It's even more difficult to do it in the charitable world, where you do not have always a focus, if I can put it this way, on the bottom line. I have been involved in one such merger of charities, driven exactly by taking cost out. And one of the two major obstacles that were there, the first, frankly, were the egos of the founders of the respective charities, and secondly, and more prosaically, taking cost out actually costs money, okay? Because you've got to pay redundancy, and the latter actually required a sort of a fundraising round, specifically to facilitate the merger, and that is a non-trivial obstacle, assuming you can get over the first, which is the ego of the founders.
Yes, agreed. Now, if you can pass the microphone to that lady there, but we'll go to a question at the back first, because you had the mic first, so carry on.
Hi, David. I'm a junior corporate lawyer, but also a trustee of a pro bono charity, so apologies for the kind of geeky lawyer question coming out. With the launch, this question I suppose for Harvey and Jamie primarily, but with the recent launch of B Corps, as part of sort of the attempt to bring this as a mainstream asset class, do you see portfolio managers bringing in more sort of what I would call traditional VC type investments, but with a social overlay, as opposed to the asset lots, kick type structures that I know sort of big society capitalists sort of currently, or at least social and sustainable capital, are linked to the kind of investments you can make, that is bringing the wider VC universe into this as a sector, a helpful way of getting those market returns?
Yes, go ahead. Kick you off. So I think there's a big opportunity there, which Nick actually touched on when he talked about definitions of organizations. So profit with purpose, I'll use as a shorthand to describe a business that is not asset locked, that can distribute profits, but that has a social mission which is locked. And the B Corp, and I'm sure most people in the room have heard of B Corps if they're not more familiar with them. The B Corp certification is a way of saying that that you are a profit with purpose business. And I think that opens up actually a wide range of investment opportunities, because these are typically companies limited by shares, so that you can take equity in them. And I think the opportunity to drive funding into businesses that are typically place-based, that are typically focused on a social mission, as well as seeing a profit opportunity, and hence have sustainability and scalability, are likely to become more and more significant as we look forward. That's not, to be clear, currently the mainstream remit of Big Society Capital, by the way in which Big Society Capital was set up. But I do see, when I look at the whole landscape here, of how businesses engage with society, that profit with purpose, and within that, this kind of B Corp certification does provide a significant platform where we can see, I think, substantial positive outcomes for society at large.
And Harvey, can I just add to that? I think one of the interesting things when we think at UBS about mainstreaming social investing, we're reminded, and making it an asset class and starting to apply investment disciplines. I think one of the interesting things about this balance between return and social outcomes is it reminds us a lot of the old days when people were quite naive about the risk they took. So they were just focused on the return. And it took a sort of a generation or two to get people to think about, no, it's the return balanced with the risk that you're taking. And I think we're going through a parallel kind of discussion where we say it's the return balanced with the social outcome that you're delivering. It's that same, there's a kind of a parallel discussion that we had. And for us to be talking solely about returns, regardless of risk, or returns regardless of social outcomes, I think, to pick up the point that I made earlier, I think that's a progression we need to go through. And people need to develop an instinct for saying, this is the return, and this is the risk you're taking doing that return, and this is the social outcome. And then there's a three-dimensional consideration, which is a more complex one, but we have to be.
On that, I think on the risk-reward return, we've got a much more, you can be much more flexible. If this is largely money that was, I'm taking the case of my own foundation, it's money that is ultimately going to be given away. So we can afford to take a slightly wider interpretation of what success looks like. And so if I take the example of iSchools, if iSchools turns into a great success, and this is and makes money, then that's great because it returns money to the foundation. If equally we develop something which is a phenomenal system for bringing primary school education in the quality primary school education in the developing world, and someone nicks the idea and it spreads like hotcakes, and as a result every child in Africa gets a much better education, and we don't make any money at all and the business goes bust. Well, you know what, that's also a fantastic result. So, which is obviously a wider interpretation of success than one might get in a normal VC fund. But you can have that sort of broad spectrum of what it looks like. But a lot of it does depend on who the investors in your fund are and what they're expecting. Because one of the dangers is that people say, well, you target an IRR, and at IB UK we target an IRR of 7%. Now, you could compare that with a VC fund that would target an IRR of, say, 14% over the same period, and say, well, we're missing out on 7%. Now, the reality is we don't know what the IRR is going to be, because on the loan side, you can more or less work that out. Of course, you've got to take into account the risk. And the one thing one has to be aware of is that you're often taking equity-style risk for a loan-style return, and that's not great business in the long term. So you've got to be aware of maybe limiting yourself to a loan-style return when you're actually taking equity-style risk. So you have to have a few of them that can go the other way and make a proper return. But it depends on the expectations of your investors. If your investors are thinking, I want a 7% return, and they're not flexible as to a 0% return with phenomenal social returns, or a high financial return, and actually maybe we didn't make much of a difference, but let's not go and give all the money away. So there's just a wider spectrum. It does depend on who put the money in and why they put the money in. And so you've got to be a little bit careful of taking money from people who are expecting 7% and are not going to be happy with 0.
Good point, thank you. Adam?
I'm Mary Marsh. I want to go back to the merger point, because I was involved with it when I was chief exec at the NSPCC, now nearly a decade ago actually, where Childline became part of NSPCC. And I think this wider conversation about risk and return and social benefit is absolutely the sorts of things you need to think about when you're in any way thinking about merger, but absolutely don't overlook the huge cost of it, the financial cost of it. And diversion of your resources from the activity you were involved in before to actually do it. The due diligence of it is huge. And so I think that idea of a fund to support charities coming together is a very good one. But I actually think that we need to learn to be better at working together and collaborating generally, not necessarily by going through formal legal mergers. So I think that there's a principle here about you wanting to make sure, as I said all the time through the work we did with Childline, was 1 + 1 had to equal at least 3. The aim was to be not just adding together, but it does take time. And then my final point that everybody should not overlook with the charity sector, and I worry about this a lot, it's this hidden elephant in the room of pension cost and the pension issues in the whole process. And there are times in charity mergers where decisions are made, and this has happened, where one charity goes bust in order to avoid the transfer of the pension liability to the merged entity. I mean, there's some really complicated issues here. So don't do it lightly, but do consider it. But yes, can we find some ways of supporting and investing in it so we can get some more 1 + 1 equaling 3?
Thank you very much.
Can I comment on that?
Yes, please do.
On mergers, and I don't have any particular expertise in mergers, except that I have a generally strong interest in scale. I think scale is really, large problems get solved through scale. I think one of the things that will possibly give us a bit of a different perspective on mergers is, as our methodology for measuring outcomes gets better and better, as we become more explicit about measuring the outcomes and the productivity of charities, I think it becomes clearer which charities are successful and which charities are less successful. I just think as the science of outcomes gets more and more developed, it'll become, I think, slightly clearer just how many charities we need and which ones would be best melded together. So I think that's a development that will come with the metrics to some extent.
Yes, thank you, David. That's a very good point. Now, just to order some questions, I've got a lady in a red dress who's got the mic, but a gentleman in a white shirt up here, Vanessa, who is in the third row from the back. You can go next. Come towards me. And stop now. There you go. Excellent. Thank you. Right, lady in the red dress first, please.
This is another point on mergers. My name is Jill Gibb. I'm actually a trustee for Centrepoint, and I'd just like to agree with everything that Mary said. I think mergers are a real issue, but I just wanted to mention that I think it was in 2009 that the social investment business actually had a blend of grant funding and loan funding specifically for merger activity, and for all the reasons the panel said, it was incredibly hard to give that money away, and we spent a lot of time going around the country talking about roadshows, and I think it goes back to thinking about, are we now perhaps a little bit more mature as a sector? I do share Mary's comments that possibly not, but I do think some funding would really help encourage people to get together. And one organisation where it really did work was Brooke, which is the young person sexual health charity, and they used a blended grant and loan funding approach to move away from a federated structure. So I think it can work. They're much more efficient now, but I do think the time is right to have a really grown-up conversation, sitting around a table to say, how can we make it work? Because there is a lot of issues in the media now about the number of charities, and I do think we have to move forward. So I would certainly work with you on that and suggest somebody goes to the social investment business and gets their learning too.
Thank you. I'll come straight to you, sir, in the white shirt, please.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Danny Witter. I have a variety of portfolio of third sector roles. I'm here wearing a trustee hat of the Microloan Foundation and Shakespeare's Globe. I'd like to get the panel's wisdom to educate me on big picture, the progress of social finance. From my less educated perspective, I'd probably say with congratulations to everybody in this room for what they're doing, but that social finance feels to me still relatively nascent, relatively experimental, and probably less progressed today than where we all thought it might be looking at its potential 10 years ago. Is that perspective agreed by anyone on the panel? And where does it go from here? How fast can it become as mainstream to do the impact we'd all love to see it?
Let me go to Harvey first, because you've got a hands-on overview of this.
Well, I think it's right to say that it's still in its early stages of development as a market. I think it's beyond nascent, though. I think it's becoming a feature of the way in which the sector gets funded. But I think it's still very much a minority part of the way in which the sector gets funded. I think if you take a broad view of what's happening, I think you have starting at one side, you have the negative screening of mainstream investments that we heard about from Alan. We have positive screening, taking an increasing part of institutional portfolios. That's where you are going beyond saying simply, I don't want to have tobacco or arms manufacturers in my portfolio. I want you to go and find businesses that I think are having a positive social impact. And then beyond that, you have what we're talking about today in a sense, which is social impact investing, where the primary intent is to have positive social impact alongside of an economic return. So there's a spectrum here, and my observation would be, having sort of observed this space now for a decade or so, is that there is more and more activity across that spectrum, and there is a journey from the left to the right, which is to say that for all the reasons that you're familiar with, those people that are investors, asset owners, or the people who are responsive to asset owners are increasingly being asked to be more responsible in the way in which they are managing those investments. What we're involved in as Big Society Capital and others in this room is a very focused component of that, and it's a relatively small component of that. But much of the methodology that we are collectively developing, particularly around impact measurement, I think is actually informing the activity in that much broader, much larger marketplace of investable funds. So I think we're in a way we are being responsive to generational change in the way in which owners of assets, just as the way buyers of coffee or buyers of t-shirts want to have services or goods provided by businesses that align with their values. I think increasingly we're seeing asset owners, investors saying, well, I want my funds invested in ways that align with my value set. So there's clearly a journey here, and I think this is not a cyclical phenomenon. This isn't a function of the financial crisis that we had. I think it was way beyond that. But I think that's the context within which I can say with some confidence that I think there's sort of progress being made here.
I would say on that point that it's very important that both sides of the equation, supply and demand, grow at the same pace, because if the supply of money grows and the number of opportunities doesn't, what happens is that the quality of investment gets deteriorates. And so it's very important that we encourage that at the same time as growing the amount of funds available, we're also encouraging people to come up with more ideas to grow the size of the pipeline.
Now, I've got one question at the back, if I may, and then we're going to pause and just change that slightly, but let me get the question at the back.
Hi, Anita Bhatia from Exeter Investment Managers, and I also sit on the board of residents. My question to the panel is that today we've heard about different forms of impact investment via equity in startups and venture capital, and also social impact bonds. I'd like to know what drives the reason to invest in bonds or to invest in equity.
Okay. Now, who would like to start with that? I suspect Wealth Management might have a view on Why would someone buy bonds or equity?
I think in some cases it's just practical matter that you can't get equity in a charity, but you can participate in debt. So I think that's part of the answer is simply that the debt is the natural instrument for charities and any social enterprises.
How would you agree?
Yes, I mean, I just think part of a balanced portfolio from an investor's point of view, you wouldn't have just bonds or just equities. So, we would have, many of our clients will have some money in equities with us and some money in our corporate bond portfolios. It's just part of a sort of balanced array of investments.
Anna,
Well, I was just looking down the description of our investment type of our 19 or so investments to date, and they are a complete mixture. But yes, you're right. I mean, the big thing for us, given that what we want to do is, by and large, is take the risk off the shoulders of the charities. And therefore, bonds and loans are inevitable. I mean, loans are inevitable.
Unlike the UK, we invest in a range of some of the charities. Some of them have locked-in returns. Some of them are purely commercial, and that does enable us to get a balance, which of course we actually need if we're trying to deliver a 7% average return. So, I mean, it's obviously this sector is not just because it's such a broad sector. What is social enterprise? And as we discussed, there's a whole range of things, ranging from the B Corp that could give you a 7-10 times return on your money, to a charity that wants to borrow money at a semi-commercial rate.
Yes, to go back to many of my investors are individual savers or people with pension schemes, and for them it's their pension pot which they're going to rely on when they retire, and therefore absolutely return is quite important. And bonds are just typically a safe form of investment compared to equities, for example.
Okay, thank you. I want to open the conversation a little bit, if we may, because we haven't got very long left, at least before the natural break.